Welcome to another unit in this exercise set Macroeconomics. This time I'm going to talk about the ASAD model. In particular, we're going to take a look how three different economic events will or can be graphically represented via the ASAD model. The three parts we're going to talk about are, first off, what happens if we foster process innovations. What happens if new trading contracts with foreign countries are actually signed? And third, what happens if the money supply is increased? Let's tackle those three parts step by step and start with the process innovations. Well, process innovations mean that our stock of knowledge increases. So via the production function, we actually have a positive effect. Production function, however, is represented via the AS curve. So here, the first part is actually a rightward shift in the AS curve due to the fact that the stock of knowledge increases. So we move from this equilibrium to this one here, and then it depends what actually happens. If the company still produces as much as possible, we might get a rightward shift of the LR AS curve. So the long run equilibrium might shift to the right. If the company, however, decides that they don't need to produce as much as before, don't have to actually put as much inputs into production as before, because they still get the same output due to the innovations, this would mean that they have to invest less, so they can cut down on their investments. They don't need as many inputs anymore. So if they decide to stick with the same output, so with meaning here for the whole economy with the same GDP, this would actually lead to a decrease in investments. A decrease in investments can be seen via a shift in the AD curve, because the AD curve represents all demand and, well, investments are demand. So if demands are decreased, if investments are decreased, we have a leftward shift of the AD curve and we get back to this equilibrium, lower price level, but still same GDP, same output. So there are basically two possibilities depending on the idea of the company. So that's already part one. In part two, we can talk about what happens if we actually have a new trading contract with foreign countries. Well, in this case, what happens is that our exports increase. If being exports, being net exports, let's start simply with exports increase. So if only exports increase, this would mean that demand would increase. This would mean that we have a rightward shift of the demand curve. So that's actually the first step which happens here. Via our trading position, we have a higher demand for our products. So it shifts to the right. The problem, however, is that, again, we have two possibilities. If companies react in such a way that they also expand and produce more, if still possible, then we would get a rightward shift of the LR AS curve. However, if they have to stick to the same output level, they actually have to decide, do we export these goods or do we actually deliver them to the home market, to our domestic market? If they decide, okay, we export more, meaning they have to cut down on delivering to their home market. So in other words, exports actually crowd out domestic supply. So in other words, this leads to a decrease in domestic supply, which means a leftward shift of our AS curve so that we get the same output level as before. Well, that's already part two. So let's go to the third and final part. Here we have an increase in the money supply. Well, the money market is part of the AD curve. So every effect in the money market has an effect on the AD curve. So if the money supply increases, this means we have a positive effect on the AD curve. So the AD curve again moves to the right. So we get a new equilibrium which lies up here. However, if the money supply increases, this usually goes along with a decrease in interest rates. If we have a decrease in interest rates, means we get capital outflows, because investment in our country is no longer as interesting as before due to a decrease in the interest rates. Okay, we have capital outflows. If we have capital outflows, this, however, means that the overall capital stock decreases. And this is reflected in the production function, which is actually making up the AS curve. So if the capital stock decreases, the AS curve moves to the left. So we get a leftward shift in the AS curve, and we go back to the original output level and to our original long run AS curve. So well, that's then also everything on the third and final part, concluding this whole exercise. So I say goodbye and see you next time for the next session.